to start a conversation on how to pass the family cottage down along to the kids in a way that makes sense, man. Because some people are just not cut out for cottages.
No, and it's a growing concern for the aging baby boom generation. A lot of them of whom are cottage owners, and they come to us with that question: how do we do it? So when you're tackling the question about the cottage, and actually, I don't know, you wouldn't remember Steve from Oakville called on our last station. He said, I want you to do a show dedicated to us high net worth people, because I want to talk about what do I do with the cottage and how do I pass it on.
Yeah.
And some of it is a financial conversation, again, and some of it is a goals-based emotional conversation. And the reality is cottage owners, especially if you've owned the cottage 20, 30 years, they love their cottage. It is part of their identity.
Makeup, their identity, for sure.
And they want that for their kids. Now, do the kids want that for themselves? It's a different story. And they're recognizing that now. There are some families that the cottage is part of the family lore, and it's always going to be in the family. And then there's some families that are like, yeah, you know what? We like mom and dad's cottage, but it's not for us. We do it for them. So when it comes time, how do I leave it to the next generation? Just like a business, you have to ask, first of all, does the next generation want that cottage? And if you're talking about, I want to leave it to all my kids, you've got 2, 3, 4 kids.
Oh, the conflict. I've experienced that, and I can tell you, it's not fun.
Yeah.
Whenever there are more than one kids involved in the equation, and kids, the in-laws, and daughter-in-law, son-in-law, and the conflict that happens when you need to share the family cottage. Who goes there when?
Yeah.
That is a nightmare. And I can tell you this: if you want to create problems between your kids, have undefined rules as to what's going to happen with the family assets once you're gone. You don't want that.
No, and that's actually, the main concern. I mean, it's almost like you're having a fantasy football draft every cottage season. Okay, which weekends do you get? Which weeks do I get? And of course, the other side of, and like I said, it literally is like a partnership in a business, because it's not just about when do we get to use it, but who's going to maintain it? How are we going to split the expense of it? What happens if some of the siblings can afford their share and some can't? And so, okay, I can't afford my share of the cottage, but I'm the handy one. So I'll be responsible for doing the work to keep up the cottage. That's going to be my financial contribution to it. So there's all of those details that need to be worked out. It is not as simple as I'm going to leave the cottage to my son and daughter and life will go on grand. So you need to have a very serious conversation about whether or not that is an objective for the kids as much as it is for you, and how are we going to define this relationship, this partnership, because we don't want too many cooks in the kitchen. There has to be some decision makers, and there's some financial reality of that cottage. So if you are able to strike an agreement, great. If not, perhaps the cottage should just be sold. Or the one that can maintain it should buy out the other, and then you still run the potential of upsetting the other children. So it can be a very contentious subject.
So let's, for the purpose of this conversation, and hopefully we can shed some light into this before the end of the show, but let's say that you do decide to sell it.
Okay.
There's got to be some tax implications with all of this.
There is. And of course, the real estate market run up has not been oblivious to the cottage world. Cottages have run up just as much. Again, COVID has had an even large impact on cottage values. My understanding is Muskoka is having one of the largest run up in prices they've ever seen this year, because people are saying, I'm stuck inside. And I need to be able to get out, and not just I want to move out of condos into individual homes, but we want to be able to get away from the city. And cottage sales have skyrocketed. So the people who've owned cottages for the last 20 or 30 years, the prices have really, really gone up, which means huge tax implications. So, I mean, the nice thing is if you're going to sell a cottage, you have the money to pay the tax, but you have to be aware that there's going to be a tax hit.
What is the tax hit?
So as an example, I bought my cottage, and I'm literally seeing numbers like this. We bought the cottage for $100,000. Today it's worth $800,000. That's a $700,000 capital gain. Half of that is taxable.
What?
So $350,000 is taxable, just like you had gone out and earned $350,000 in a job. It gets added to your income tax. So if you choose to sell the cottage, then we have to be aware of the tax implications to do so. And that's actually the conversation some of the people have had with me to say, you know what, we really only spend a couple weeks a year with the kids at the cottage. We enjoy it, but it's getting too much for us to handle. The kids only come up when we invite them. Maybe we can sell the cottage and rent a cottage for a couple of weeks every year. You know, wouldn't it be great to sell the $800,000 cottage, put most of that in our pocket, and even if it costs us $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 to rent a place, we'll do that once a year and we get our cottage fix. And the rest of the time we get to enjoy traveling to other places because the kids don't want the cottage. So, you know, selling the cottage is a real possibility, but tax planning is, you know, this is one of the questions that someone will come to me. We are going to leave the cottage to the kids, or we want to sell it to them now so that future appreciation is to their benefit. We don't need any more. We're trying to minimize the tax today. How do we do it? So, you know, there are a couple of structures other than just outright paying the tax. Because understand, if I take my cottage and give it to you, my son, the capital gains tax that are owing become owed now when I transfer.
Are you serious?
When I transfer the value.
So if there is $1 million capital gain and I gift that cottage to my daughter or my son, those taxes become due today.
Correct.
And they need to go against the value of that cottage.
Well, they don't go against the value of the cottage. $1 million cottage, and there's a $600,000, $700,000 capital gain. My tax bill on that's going to be probably about $175,000. The government says, I'd like my $175,000 now. Give it to whoever you want, especially if it's a family member. We want our taxes. So they say, well, now I'm losing the asset, but I've got to come up with $175,000. The kids don't have that money. So, you know, it's a real challenge. And so one of the ways that people have been able to affect the taxes, you can structure the deal over several years. The kids are going to buy the cottage. Notice the sarcastic air quotes. They're going to buy the cottage off me over the next 5 years. So that $700,000 capital gain, I'll pay 20% per year for the next 5 years. So I can stretch the costs out over a period of time, but the cost will be owed.
You know, this is a very, very interesting topic of conversation because I can tell you that there are many people that have cottages up in the Muskokas that are not hundreds of thousands of dollars. They're millions of dollars. And by you leaving this to your kids, the taxes are due today. If your kids are in no position to pay for those taxes, now they're going to have to sell the asset. At that point, they're essentially going to lose 50% of the appreciation of that asset over however many years you may have had it. Am I incorrect with this?
25%. 50% of it's taxable.
Yeah.
Top tax bracket would be half of that. So yeah, you could lose 25% of the value. But the biggest effect is I have this huge asset. I want to keep it in the family. But if I don't plan for the taxes, the kids don't have the money to pay the tax bill. They will have no choice but to sell it. And that's what we're trying to avoid. They want to keep the cottage.
Folks, if you are in that position and you need some tax guidance, you may want to write this number down. Or if your parents are in this position and you know that this is a conversation that can be had, that is being had, or that will be had at one point or another, the number is 905-320-6762. That is Mike's direct line, and you can send him an email at moneymike.ca.